समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Trump's first 100 days in office have played out like a high-octane spectacle, rife with contradictions, chaos, and consequence. A tariff war meant to flex economic muscle has so far impacted America's own interests. With rushed, half-baked ceasefires, this administration has been more committed to applauding its president than crafting coherent strategy for anything. High on swagger and shock, low on substance. Lost in this whirlwind and the political fallout of Signalgate, the security scandal that led to the high-profile ousting of National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, there is also a forgotten minerals deal with Ukraine. But the last 2 days have turned its fate. The deal's first outing had ended in a disaster. I hope everybody remembers the Oval Office altercation between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And this particular incident was milked to the hilt by Vice President J.D. Vance, Trump's heir apparent. Post the debacle, most doubted its revival in near future. However, defying earlier pessimism, the minerals deal between the United States and Ukraine has been officially signed on 30th of April this year. With this agreement, the Trump administration finally notched its first and, may I say, the only tangible achievement to present to both the international community and its own electorate. So, in the first 100 days dominated by erratic posturing on allies and adversaries, scattershot tariff wars, and chaotic foreign policy maneuvers, this deal stands out not just for its substance but for its sheer survival through all the noise. Amid the confusion, contradictions, and controversy, there is one concrete outcome. Though whether it's enough to quiet the broader strategic dissonance remains to be seen. And here I mean with respect to the Russia-Ukraine war. So let's decode the change in Trump's strategy towards this war. Trump's strategy towards Ukraine so far has been driven less by diplomacy and more by coercion. His administration leaned hard on Kyiv to accept a ceasefire, or more bluntly, to accept whatever terms Trump dictated. In a bid to pressure Kyiv, Washington cut back weapons deliveries and intelligence sharing, tightening the screws just as Ukraine faced mounting pressure from Russia's indiscriminate attacks on civilians and energy infrastructure. And at the same time, Trump administration began openly cozying up to Moscow, echoing Russian talking points. And I'm sure you all remember that sent shockwaves through European capitals, forcing a scramble to recalibrate what the future of the transatlantic alliance might look like under Trump 2.0. So despite direct phone calls and shuttle diplomacy carrying sticks for Ukraine and carrots for Moscow, the administration efforts yielded little results. Any fleeting progress collapsed within hours. The reality was becoming painfully clear. Trump had grossly underestimated the complexity and endurance of the war in Ukraine. As the administration's tariff threats grew louder and Trump delivered his bombastic Liberation Day commandments, global attention shifted. The minerals deal, once a centerpiece of Trump's Ukraine policy, was quietly forgotten. And as it always happens, the world moved on. But the shift in Trump's Ukraine strategy became evident after two pivotal events. The first was the Paris summit, or the Paris talks, hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron on 17th of April, where Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff, then serving as a special envoy to the Middle East and now tipped to become the next national security advisor, held their most substantial discussions yet with European leaders from the UK, from France, Germany, as well as top Ukrainian officials. Now, this talks marked the administration's first clear acknowledgement that resolving the Ukraine war requires engaging European allies and giving Europe and Ukraine a central role in determining the outcome of the war. And the second opportunity came rather quickly at the funeral of Pope Francis in Rome on 26th of April. There, President Trump and President Zelensky met in person for the first time since their Oval Office spat. Images of the two leaders in seemingly good spirits at the St. Peter's Basilica quickly circulated online, indicating a tentative thaw in their strained relationship. And within a week of this encounter, or maybe within days of this encounter, the breakthrough came. The stalled US-Ukraine minerals deal was officially signed. Ukraine hailed it as the first concrete result from Vatican meeting, and US called it historic. Hours later, a second significant development followed. President Trump approved $50 million in direct weapons sales to Ukraine. Now, even though the US has been the biggest military support to Ukraine under the Biden administration, Trump 2.0 had put a freeze on further military aid or sales. So this marked the administration's first military sale to Ukraine since Trump's return to office in 2025. And I would say it is a notable reversal given his earlier refusal to sell Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine. Now, one can argue that $50 million sales is relatively modest compared to Ukraine's broader defense needs. But it does signal a shift in tone. And more revealing is the method of the sale. Let me explain. The deal has been conducted through direct commercial sales, or the DCS mechanism, as opposed to the more tightly controlled foreign military sales, or the FMS process, which is managed by the Defense Security Cooperation Agency. DCS allows purchasing countries to negotiate directly with defense companies, making it a more flexible and market-driven approach. In fact, shortly after this, Trump administration has also announced a $360 million military package for F-16 training and support for Ukraine. So Trump is reframing military aid as a transactional opportunity for the United States defense industry. For Ukraine, this evolving relationship is one they have long anticipated. While the dependency on US arms remain, entering into a business-like arrangement may finally free Kyiv from the exhausting ritual of repeatedly proving its gratitude, when, in the eyes of Trump's inner circle, no number of thank yous ever suffice. As regards the minerals deal, what has changed? What makes the newly signed US-Ukraine minerals deal noteworthy is not merely its signing, but the substantial changes it has undergone to reach this point. For instance, the initial version of the agreement had been criticized as exploitative, offering the US access to Ukraine's untapped rare earth resources at throwaway prices, part of a broader strategy to counter China's dominance in the global rare earth market. Trump had openly emphasized his need for the deal, repeating its strategic value to the US. The original version had also failed in part due to its lopsided terms. It gave little room for European investment and demanded that Ukraine contribute 67% of the joint investment fund, while the US would offer only 33%. In contrast, the final agreement now calls for equal contributions from both sides, marking a major win for Kyiv. Another significant revision eliminates any requirement for Ukraine to repay US aid provided since 2022, which is beginning of this particular war, in any kind of arrears. And this was an earlier condition that had sparked dismay in Ukrainian and European circles. So the agreement now aligns more closely with Ukraine's constitutional framework for EU accession and no longer works against it. It also includes a strengthened role for the US International Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, and this has been tasked with raising further investments. Crucially, the deal now offers tax-free status to fund contributions, correcting a previous clause that would have imposed burdensome tax liabilities. Now, although Trump remains firm that NATO membership for Ukraine is off the table, he has suggested that the American presence under this economic partnership could serve as a de facto, which means like a practical security guarantee. Now, whether this claim will hold weight remains to be seen. In fact, for these so-called security guarantees to start working, you have to have investments that have to come to Ukraine. Now, when does that happen is not clear either. Still, the deal is the clearest sign yet that the Trump administration is beginning to engage with Ukraine in a more cooperative rather than confrontational manner. But the real test will come if Trump follows through with additional actions. What are they? Such as sanctioning Russia's shadow fleet and imposing other fiscal sanctions to pressure the Kremlin into de-escalation. So as regards the deal, the next step is ratification by Ukraine's parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, and then in Washington, where Trump currently enjoys solid support. So for now, this deal marks a diplomatic win for Kyiv and for European leaders who have persistently sought a just and lasting peace for Ukraine as crucial for the security of the continent. Now, from New Delhi, there has been a studied silence on mediation in the Ukraine war, largely shaped by Trump's rhetoric that distances the US from Europe and Ukraine. India has taken a pragmatic approach, positioning itself to benefit from any thaw in US-Russia relations. That said, Trump's unpredictability has created widespread uncertainty. Despite this, India actually stands to gain from a renewed American engagement in Ukraine. You know why? Because a stronger US presence could open opportunities for Indian businesses to participate in Ukraine's reconstruction. Now, this involvement would allow India to collaborate with European as well as American partners in rebuilding efforts, aligning economic interests with diplomatic gains. So it could elevate India's global image, not just as a strategic player, but also as a committed humanitarian and development partner contributing to Ukraine's post-war recovery, an optimal outcome of India's long-standing neutrality. So I'm going to be back to discuss this and more. Stay tuned.